A chemical used in rocket fuel that disrupts thyroid function is contaminating our soil and food with the FDA and EPA's approval. The compound perchlorate is used in rocket fuel, missiles, explosives, batteries, and plastics, and Consumer Reports testing just discovered it in 67% of food samples. Consumer Reports found perchlorate in a wide range of packaged food, fast food, and even fresh fruits and vegetables, with the average concentrations here on the screen. What's most concerning is that the food with the highest levels of perchlorate is for babies and kids. While perchlorate can be naturally occurring in parts of the world, this is not how it gets into our food supply. Perchlorate enters into our food supply because of contaminated water absorbed by crops and plastic packaging used for processed food. Water can be contaminated with perchlorate from propellants, explosives, pyrotechnics like fireworks or flares, fertilizers, and old bleach. Perchlorate is permitted by the FDA to be in food contact materials and packaging for dried food since it's an anti-static agent. Food levels in plastic containers had the highest average levels of perchlorate compared to plastic wrap and paperboard. The EPA created an official reference dose at 0.7 micrograms per kilogram of body weight per day, while the EFSA established a tolerable daily intake of 0.3 micrograms per kilogram of body weight per day. For reference, 0.3 micrograms per kilogram of body weight per day is equivalent to 0.3 parts per billion. So if a 2-year-old is 27 pounds, their tolerable daily intake would be 3.6 micrograms or 3.6 parts per billion of perchlorate per day. While the levels of perchlorate in individual foods tested could not exceed the tolerable daily intake, a few servings of different foods tested like mac and cheese, rice cereal, yogurt, cucumbers, baby carrots, and collard greens could for babies and kids. And this doesn't even factor in the amount of perchlorate that we can be exposed to from tap water. It wasn't included in the report, but I found that the kidneys start to remove perchlorate within 10 minutes of our body being exposed to it. Around 30% of perchlorate is excreted in urine within 3 hours of exposure, 65 to 70% within 24 hours, and 95% within 48 hours. So while perchlorate doesn't appear to accumulate in the body, perchlorate exposure does interfere with iodine absorption and disrupts thyroid hormone production, which can be extremely consequential. In babies, this can disrupt brain development and growth, which could have lifelong effects. In adults, this can contribute to hypothyroidism and metabolic disorders. The Consumer Report research noted that while perchlorate levels could add up to concerning levels, the levels are not high enough to be immediately harmful. While I agree with their sentiment to not cause panic among consumers, their conclusion seems to be somewhat contradictory to their data. As they point out on multiple occasions in the report, babies and kids can easily chronically exceed the EFSA's safe daily intake for perchlorate. Additionally, their report cites a study that found when women who had thyroid dysfunction were exposed to higher levels of perchlorate during pregnancy, their children were 3 times more likely to exhibit negative brain effects than children whose mothers were exposed to low levels of perchlorate during pregnancy. This raises questions as to whether the perchlorate levels outlined in the report could be harmful for acute exposure to sensitive populations and for chronic exposure to adult populations. The exact level at which this could happen isn't clear and is variable because it's impacted by how much iodine we consume. As I recently talked about with brominated vegetable oil, iodine deficiency is an increasing occurrence, especially among young women. Furthermore, pregnant women and children are at the greatest risk of experiencing thyroid dysfunction from perchlorate exposure when they are already iodine deficient to begin with. You receive iodine from seafood, algae, dairy, and eggs, and you can look for the exact amount in different foods by searching the report here that you see on the screen. The FDA and EPA have long been aware of the widespread perchlorate contamination, which has largely been caused by the Department of Defense. In 2011, the EPA concluded that between 5.2 and 16.5 million Americans could be exposed to concerning amounts of perchlorate in their tap water, which is considered to be an underestimate. The first thing that the FDA needs to do is remove perchlorate's approval for use in food contact materials. They also need to require more strict food testing on baby and kids' food. On top of that, the EPA needs to set a maximum contaminant level for perchlorate in tap water, just like California and Massachusetts have done. The EPA has continually pushed back plans to do this, and now says they will only propose a limit by November 21st of 2025, following an NRDC lawsuit. The EPA also needs to enforce that water utilities don't use old bleach in their water treatment process. Now, the best way you can reduce perchlorate exposure and risk is by using a reverse osmosis water filter at home, avoid overeating dried foods in plastic packaging, prioritizing whole foods over processed packaged food, buying local when you can, and consuming sufficient iodine levels. If you're worried about perchlorate or your thyroid function in general, I would highly recommend you see an endocrinologist and a naturopath to get your blood tested.